Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. If you listen to episode 85 called Narcissism, Gaslighting, Love Bombing, Hoovering, and Healing from a Narcissistic Relationship with Amy Marlow-Macoy, you're really going to enjoy this episode today. After Amy and I finished recording that episode, we really didn't get a chance to talk a lot about how does one heal after they've been in a toxic or abusive relationship. So we made a plan to hop on and do another recording. And in this episode, Amy talks about what kinds of therapy can be helpful for healing narcissistic abuse. She gives a number of exercises from the gaslighting book that she's written. There's a beautiful meditation that comes up in this episode, and we give you a little bit of a heads up, but if you want to listen to it and close your eyes or get into a comfortable spot, I'm just letting you know that it's coming, and if you want to come back to it, you can do that. She also talks about what kinds of wounds does narcissistic abuse leave behind, and she talks about people end up really lacking confidence, they don't have a sense of purpose, the narcissist will devalue and discard them. They feel lied to. She does a beautiful job explaining this. We also talk about, can you heal if your narcissist is a family member and you don't have the ability to cut contact with them? This is such a great episode. And we talk about internal family systems and talking to those parts of us that have been really wounded. Again, going back to, how that sense of belief and trust in yourself really gets eroded when you're in a toxic or abusive relationship. The struggles that we have with people pleasing, why that sense of connection can be important and where we get into trouble. We talk about codependency. I just really love this conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about Amy. Amy Marlow-Macoy is a licensed professional counselor located in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. Amy specializes in treating adults from narcissistic, emotionally immature, or toxic relationships. Amy recently published the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook, a book designed to help readers identify gaslighting in relationships, protect themselves from further abuse, and begin to heal. In sessions and in writing, Amy uses warmth, compassion, and a geeky sense of humor to support her clients in healing. You can find everything in this episode, and Amy talks about a blog that she wrote in the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com. Just go to this episode and click on it, and on the very bottom is a place called Resources, and you can find all the links that we talked about. If you're open to completing the podcast survey that I have, or you're interested in the top most downloaded episodes for the podcast, I would love to have you do that. It's in the show notes or at my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. The survey is to help me get a chance to know you. It's anonymous. You don't have to answer any questions that you're not comfortable with. It will help me to create content for you. And if I'm going to be getting sponsors for the podcast, it will give me some demographics about who you are. You have an opportunity to sign up for my newsletter if you want the top most downloaded episodes. Once you get them, if you want to unsubscribe, that's fine. It's taken me almost 2 years to get a news list together. I don't even have a newsletter yet, so could be another 2 years. Remember, done is better than perfect. And now, on to the show. Hey, Amy, welcome back.
Thanks, Patricia. I'm really happy to be back again.
I am too, and I know that we really didn't get a chance to focus too much on the healing part of if you're in a relationship with someone who's narcissistic, has narcissistic tendencies, is abusive, toxic. So that's really what we're going to dial in on today. But can you start out, if somebody is brand new listening to the podcast or didn't listen to the previous episode, how does somebody know if they're in a relationship with somebody who is narcissistic?
Sure. Relationships with a narcissistic person is not just having a relationship with someone who takes a lot of selfies. A narcissistic person is someone who lacks empathy, who really can only see their own needs in the world, who's unable to feel much compassion for anyone else, and whose primary goals really are taking care of number one. Everyone else tends to be secondary in those relationships. They're often defined by emotional abuse as well.
And it can start out looking like they're incredibly attentive to their partner, and people in the outside that are not inside of that relationship often think that these are charming, caring, captivating people because they can be very charismatic. But what happens inside the relationship is an entirely different story, which can be incredibly, incredibly crazy making if you're the person who's in the relationship with the narcissist.
Absolutely. Actually, I used this metaphor earlier today. Being in a relationship with a narcissist can be like seeing your absolute favorite piece of candy. And you're like, oh man, there's that delicious candy. It looks so good. It's perfect for me. And then you bite into it and it's full of like garbage. So you think you're getting one thing, and then once you get into it, it's something totally different, and you can't tell from the outside.
Right. So if you find that you are in a relationship, but let's just call it a toxic relationship, somebody who's got narcissistic tendencies, whether they're a narcissist or not, often people don't understand, well, why did you get in this relationship? But the way the relationship starts in the beginning is very, very different from what it unfolds. So I just want to make that really clear, because people don't often understand, or they blame themselves or think they should have seen things coming, but it's just so crazy making.
Absolutely. And nobody would be in a narcissistic relationship if they knew from the outset that the person was going to be abusive.
Right.
I mean, narcissists are really experts at crafting and projecting the ideal image that will pull you in and make you think this is amazing.
Right.
And that's how they get you.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of wounds does narcissistic abuse leave behind?
So I see people who often will start out looking for therapy for things like anxiety and depression. They'll say, I just can't get past this relationship that ended, or I never have any self-confidence. I worry about everything. I overthink everything. I feel just kind of down all the time, or I feel like there's no purpose in my life. And oftentimes when we explore those issues and we trace it back and we see that these have been part of their life for as long as they can remember, it's often related to a narcissistic or toxic relationship.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And do you see this primarily with people that have had a parent that is narcissistic and then they end up recreating that relationship with somebody else?
I do see that very frequently. Sometimes when people come in because of a breakup, or even if it's their marriage ending and they're trying to co-parent. So I will see that someone comes in for a presenting concern like a bad breakup or something. When we get into it, we'll find that this is not the first time they have felt this way, that they have felt devalued and discarded and betrayed and lied to, because they will feel that their person misrepresented themselves when they first met them, that they presented as this wonderful, charming, kind, caring, compassionate, attentive partner. And then once they get behind closed doors, it's a whole nother person. And when we look at those feelings of I've been here before, oftentimes there is a parent or a family member that modeled the same kinds of traits. And we learn that that is normal. And so that's what you kind of expect from other relationships.
Sure. How can you know that there's anything different if that's what you were raised with?
Right.
What kinds of therapy can be especially healing for narcissistic abuse?
So I will be very upfront. I totally have a bias here because it's my absolute favorite way of working. I absolutely love IFS for this. And IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. It's a mode of therapy that is incredibly compassionate and gentle. And what I think makes it especially well suited to working with adult children of narcissists or victims of narcissistic abuse is that it really does gently and kindly go to the wounded inner child that we all carry with us and helps heal that child so that his or her pain or their pain is no longer echoing throughout your whole system and driving so many of your decisions.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more for people that aren't familiar with IFS? Can you just talk a little bit more about why that would be helpful?
Yeah. So whether you use IFS or any other modality, a big piece of the healing work in narcissistic abuse is going to the wounded places inside of you, the places where the narcissist really poked your sore spots or created new sore spots that kind of knock down your confidence in yourself or your sense of self-efficacy and ability to handle life, and shoring up those wounded places and bringing healing. What I like about IFS is that it's about helping you reconnect to the places in yourself that you've either forgotten about or that had to get kind of walled off because the pain was so bad, it would cripple you if you felt it. But with IFS, you can go to those places with the healing abilities you have inside of yourself, because we all have this place inside that can heal, and bringing it to those wounds so that those parts can release the burdens they've been carrying. And you can bring your best self, your confident, compassionate, assertive, strong, beautiful self to the world.
I love that. Lindsay Gibson, the author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was on last week. And one of the things that she said that I just loved is highly sensitive people, we often have awareness about what's going on and what needs to change. But if we don't do that feeling work, we can't heal. And it's so easy to explain what happened and why we struggle with the things that we do. But really that healing comes from doing that feeling work, that's really the only way through. I see you nodding your head. Would you like to add some words to that?
I'm nodding over here like a bobblehead. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. And I cannot wait to listen to the next interview with Lindsay, because I recommend her book every single day. Feeling work is some of the hardest work for an HSP to do. And it seems so kind of backwards, because we are deep feelers. We are people who feel the slightest ripple in the water, the slightest wave in the air, and we know something's happening. But when we turn that on the inside, we feel our pain, we feel our uncertainty, we feel our insecurity. That can be so overwhelming, and we may avoid it hardcore. And that's one of the reasons that I personally find that some of the modalities that tap into thinking more, like cognitive behavioral therapy, there are a lot of benefits to CBT. There's a lot of ways it can help people. I don't think it's the ideal for this kind of work, because you really do need to be able to feel. And not that CBT completely ignores feeling, but the focus is more on your thought patterns. And I think you need to be able to get to the heart of what your mind, your heart, and your body are all feeling to really get the most benefit from this.
Yeah. I love IFS work. I went and saw an IFS practitioner when I was struggling with some relationship issues. And I just think it's incredibly powerful, because we all have those parts inside of us that need time and attention. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. If somebody is wanting to heal from an abusive, toxic relationship, what kind of therapist should they look for?
So I do think it's really important to look for a therapist who has a good, solid, strong understanding of toxic relationships. And granted, a lot of us out there will say, yes, we understand emotional abuse. We understand verbal abuse. Narcissistic abuse is a whole nother animal. It's a horse of a different color. And you really want to make sure you find a therapist who understands and specializes in treating narcissistic abuse. There are a lot of wonderful therapists out there with amazing skill sets and really good hearts. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can make it worse. So don't be afraid to be picky.
So what are some questions that somebody could ask if they're looking for a therapist?
So I would suggest asking, are you familiar with narcissistic abuse? Do you understand how that differs from other types of abuse? Have you worked with people who have survived narcissistic relationships before? What's your understanding of the ways that narcissistic abuse affects people? And I think also a very important question to ask, and I've had this asked of me when people call for a consultation, is, do you believe that you need to reconcile with narcissistic family members? Because unfortunately, a lot of times with the very best of intentions, a therapist or social worker or even a coach or a pastor may say, well, it's your family and you should love them and we should reconcile and forgive them. And, you can't just cut off your family. Ideally, yes, you'd be able to reconcile with someone and create a healthier relationship than what you started with. That is not always possible. And I am of the belief that if you cannot have a healthy relationship with someone, you do not need to subject yourself to further abuse.
I love that. And it's really on an individual basis, but I love that permission giving, that we've got to do what works for us. It's going to give us peace.
Absolutely.
So let's get down to some brass tacks here. What are some of the things that you see people struggling with either while they're in a relationship or when they get out of a relationship, so that we can talk about tools for healing?
Yes. One of the biggest casualties I see of narcissistic relationships is the victim's self-confidence. Narcissism does heavily employ gaslighting as a tactic to manipulate and to control a situation, a relationship, your perspective on things. So when you have experienced a lot of gaslighting, it tends to undermine your sense of belief in yourself, your ability to trust yourself. And if you can neither believe nor trust in yourself, it's going to be awfully hard to stand up for yourself. So rebuilding a sense of self-confidence is pretty key.
And what are some ways that people can do that?
Well, one way, and this is going to sound so basic, but one way is to stop looking to the narcissist to tell you if you're right. Don't look for validation where you're not going to get it. Sometimes we get kind of stuck on this idea that maybe this time they'll be nice. Maybe this time they'll validate me. Maybe this time they won't be cruel, or they'll hear what I'm saying. And unfortunately, as much as I like to give the benefit of the doubt whenever possible, that's not always realistic when you're dealing with a narcissistic person.
Sure.
Spend time with the people who do validate you and support you, and don't look for that from the sources that tear you down.
Can you give an example of what that might look like? I love theory, but I always love personal experiences. So can you make up somebody and what they might be trying to get from the narcissist, and then how they could give that approval to themselves?
Sure. Let's say you are hurt by something that your narcissist said. So they made a comment about how that dress makes your butt look big. And they know that you've always been sensitive about the shape of your body, that you've always felt insecure about your body. And you are just humiliated and upset and hurt by what they said. They made a mean joke at your expense. And so you go to your narcissist and you say like, hey, that joke about my butt, that actually really hurt my feelings. Like, you know that doesn't feel good for me. And I worry about my body shape and my body size. And like, that just was really upsetting. And a narcissist might gaslight you by saying like, oh, here we go again. You're being too sensitive. Your butt is not that big. It was a joke. Get a sense of humor. You really need to lighten up. This is why people don't want to be around you, because you take everything so seriously. Like, I'm not having this discussion anymore. You don't like your butt, work out. And then you're left feeling like, oh my God, did I make a mountain out of a molehill? Am I totally exaggerating this? Am I harping on it when I should just let it go? Do I not have a sense of humor? And the truth is, they said something hurtful, and they said it knowing that it hurt you. And you were not wrong to bring it up. The fact that they didn't respond in a loving or kind way doesn't mean that you were wrong to say something. And so where you can validate yourself is to say, my feelings count. My feelings don't have to be right or wrong. They're just feelings. They don't have to be proven, and they don't have to be justified. I get to feel how I feel. And I get to speak up for myself if someone says or does something hurtful to me.
I love that. That's beautiful. Do you find that it's usually easy or difficult for people to start taking this and giving themselves the messages that they really need to be hearing?
It can be, yes. There can be some resistance to showing ourselves kindness. Sometimes people are afraid that if they are nice to themselves, they're letting themselves off the hook. And then they're going to turn into a narcissist because they aren't going to hold themselves accountable for anything. And that always makes me sad, because I think you should be able to give yourself compassion and grace. You shouldn't have to try to be perfect to feel like you can love yourself. And that's a message that I love helping clients unlearn, that you don't have to be perfect. You get to be you, and you are lovable just as you are.
Well, and I think with our sense of being very conscientious and how we can be so hard on ourselves, often we take in the negative messages and we want to be responsible for our part. But when we're involved with gaslighting, or we've internalized negative messages, even if it's not a toxic relationship, we tend to make everything about it's my fault and I'm too sensitive, or I should have been more this, or I should have been more that. And so really being able to see that that's the construct of what's going on. And exactly like you said, that I think our culture is really about pushing people that, if I don't push myself, I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to, whatever your worst case scenario is. And really helping people understand that the way to have a full, joyous, pleasurable life is about allowing ourselves to be wherever we're at and to really have that sense of self-love and self-compassion. It can be so hard for people to understand that. Do you find that also?
Totally. And I promise I'm not a shill for big IFS, but that's one of the other things that I really love about that way of working, is that there's a saying that came up constantly in my IFS training, and that was, all parts are welcome. All parts of you are welcome here. And that's a genuine, true foundational core aspect of that practice. And I think that's so powerful for people to feel accepted by themselves, let alone anyone else. Because I found this to be such a challenge for many of my clients, one of the exercises in my book, the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook, is called the I love you exercise. And I wrote it there knowing some people are going to absolutely hate this because it's going to be so hard for them to send love to themselves. But it's that important to me to be able to show ourselves kindness and love that I was like, I'm going to risk them hating it because I think this is important.
Yes. And often what we're the most resistant is where we need to do the most healing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
It's interesting. This is a little bit of an aside, but it really does tie in that, as some of you know, I'm in the process of, I just bought some kayaks and then we're trying to get car racks and then get the kayaks out. And what's happened is the part of me that has a really hard time making decisions and I don't understand how roof systems work and tie downs. And, you know, I go to the worst case scenario of, you know, the kayak's going to slide off my roof. And not only am I going to lose my kayak, but it's going to kill people and there's going to be a 20-car pileup. I mean, just the part of me that gets incredibly anxious and overwhelmed and is not able to make decisions. And today was the first day that I took the kayak to the bay, and it's just so interesting that that part of me that is so fearful and so anxious and wants to ask a lot of questions, and the fear from my history of like, it's going to be annoying to people because how can I know what I don't know? And it just has to get familiar and I have to get over my fearful questions to start feeling comfortable. And I really was practicing like, oh, isn't this interesting that like this part of me that I really like the traits of being an HSP that people really struggle with, the overwhelm and the decision making, like, yeah, she's up a lot right now. And how can I just observe that and have compassion and be okay with it? And knowing that like I'm a beginner and it's going to change over time, but I can see that if I didn't have this awareness, man, would I be beaten up on my self-esteem because, you know, the feelings are so strong. I'm not necessarily acting out on them, but I'm very aware of how, you know, like my brain is just in worst case scenario. And it's been for a couple of weeks now. So, you know, using that mindfulness and going, isn't that interesting? This is part of me that really, really worries about all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's go back and can you talk about some more areas where people might be struggling and some exercises that they can do?
Sure. So I actually wanted to speak to what you were just talking about, of that sense of like recognizing and acknowledging and holding acceptance for the parts of you that other people may find frustrating or that you may find frustrating. I'm going to share with you something that I actually borrowed from my LPC supervisor when I was in supervision. When she first introduced the concept of IFS, I remember that, you know, one of the things we talked about was this idea that when a scared child part of us comes up, say a part that feels overwhelmed by having to make a decision or that feels like it can't make the right decision or it can't do anything right. When those parts of us come up and we're aware of them, that we can take it a step beyond just saying, oh, hey, I noticed that you're there. We can also kind of imagine putting an arm around that little girl or little boy or little child and saying like, hey, I'm here with you too. I'm a grown-up. Grown-up me is here too. I'm going to help you with this. So that we're kind of letting that little child part of us know they don't have to make all the decisions from that child place. The world is too big for them, but we're here to help.
I love that.
And that can feel so soothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think even statements like, we've got this, I've got your back, I'm here with you. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, as you were talking, I think that those are things that I've just automatically started doing to reassure myself when those things come up. But just what you would say to a friend, you know, we'll get through this. We've got this. It's okay. It's okay to be a first time. It's okay to be scared. Like, we'll get through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Do you want to talk about what the I love you exercise is, or do you want to have people get your book? I don't know how much you want to give away.
I have a bad habit of giving away too much.
Okay, well, let's honor that.
I'll give you one. So this is actually a meditation. So I will read through it and I will try not to go too fast. Sometimes I do. I'll try to slow it down.
So if somebody is not driving and they're in a place where they can get comfortable and close their eyes, is that something you would recommend?
Yes, I would say if you're able to do so safely, to either sit or stand or lay, however you're comfortable, and close your eyes. You're going to imagine sitting across the table from your inner critic. Picture yourself sitting or standing close enough to your inner critic to see its eyes and hear its voice. Notice if you feel anxious, sad, angry, or afraid. Breathe deeply and slowly, using your diaphragm and feeling your belly expand with each inhalation and deflate with each exhalation. Breathe in peace, calm, and confidence. Breathe out anger, fear, and anxiety. Look at your critic and tell it you are here to have a talk. Begin by telling the critic you listen to what it has to say now, and that you are ready to hear what it doesn't like about you. Ask the critic to name one complaint at a time so you can hear the criticism and respond. Make sure to check in with your breathing throughout the meditation. Continue to breathe slowly and deeply, filling your breath, filling and emptying your lungs. As you listen to your inner critic, try to remain curious and open. Do you recognize the voice? How do you feel when you hear something negative about you? Where do you feel the response in or around your body? If you feel worried, upset, or distracted, return to your deep breathing until you can resume your conversation with this inner critic. Now, this is important. Every time your inner critic names a complaint, pause. Notice how you feel and where you feel the response. Place a hand where you feel your emotional response and say, "I love you." Repeat this step after every criticism. How do you feel as you say, "I love you," after every criticism? Does your heart feel hard, constricted, or wounded? Place a hand over your heart and say, "I love you." Continue repeating, "I love you," until you feel your heart soften, warm, and open up full of love. When you feel your heart is open and full of love, look at your inner critic, that part of you that reminds you of every mistake and flaw, and say, "I love you too." How does that feel? That's the end of that meditation. And I know that we tend to have a super adversarial relationship with our inner critics, but I really wanted to introduce a new way of interacting with these parts of ourselves, because most of the time, believe it or not, they're trying to help.
Absolutely. I love that. That was beautiful. What if somebody is having a lot of resistance that comes up, or they're only able to respond in a very angry way that they want to shut this down? What would you say to that person?
Then I would say, if you can, try to welcome that angry part of you. Literally look into your own heart and say, "Welcome, angry part. You have a voice here, and I want to hear what it is you want to say." Create space for that angry part, because so much of the time we stuff them down, we try to shut them up, we tell ourselves to be nice. Anger is just as healthy and normal and appropriate of a response as any other feeling that you could have.
Yeah, yeah. I can remember being in my 20s and doing this 5-day very intense workshop, and we had to meditate, and getting quiet was I couldn't. I remember one of the facilitators having to go outside of the room and work with me. And I think probably because of my trauma history, I just could not sit with myself. It was so, it just made me feel like I was crawling the walls. So if we have resistance that comes up, it's not a bad thing. We just have to find ways to work through it. I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am a big fan of do what works for you. So pick the variation that works for you. It does not have to be exactly the way something is written down or the way someone else teaches you. If you have parts that cannot tolerate sitting still and listening inward, it's too noisy in there, or it's too quiet, and they're scared of what's going to come up, that's okay. Walk around and think. Do a puzzle and think. Do something that allows you to be present enough to notice if something comes up and to keep one foot in the present so that you can be inside and outside at the same time. And that's essentially how the work of EMDR, eye movement, reprocessing, and desensitization, did those words in the wrong order, but that's part of how EMDR works, is that we can reprocess a traumatic memory while also keeping a foot in the present, which can also be highly effective.
Yeah, I love that. And I think many people, I mean, this is a little bit different, but, you know, I love the term fidget to focus, that some of us need to move in order to take in information and to process, because it's just how we're wired, being highly sensitive. We're already neurodivergent, and we really need to honor the ways that we learn. And so if we have to move to take in information, then there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. What are some other areas where you see wounding happen and things that people can do to heal or to start bringing awareness to those areas?
I would say people pleasing is a really big area that I see folks fall into. They start believing that if they can just be a good enough person, a good enough daughter, good enough wife, good enough husband or son or brother, whoever, partner, that they can sort of charm the narcissist into treating them better. If it's just that they don't provoke them, then they won't get angry. They won't say something mean. So they, take all the responsibility and the blame onto themselves and completely absolve the narcissist of any harm that they are doing. And then they carry this huge weight of not only managing their own stuff in a relationship, but managing their partner or the other person's emotional state. And the idea is that you just have to be perfect enough, and then they won't hurt you. And I'm sorry if you have been led to believe that that is possible, but I mean, that is like literally a unicorn. It doesn't exist.
Right.
You cannot be perfect enough to make someone else happy with you. It's just not how it works.
Right. And I often think that when we have a sense of powerlessness, perfectionism, people pleasing, those are ways that we get a false sense of control. If I can just do things right, if I can just get things perfect, if I can just be agreeable enough. That often comes from childhood too. If we lived in an environment where our parents were very unpredictable, that if we could just figure out what they needed. And there may have been a time where there was truth to that we're really good at reading a room and we know how to keep conflict down. But the challenge is that then many people end up being really afraid of having conflict and not seeing that in healthy relationships, we want to have conflict because it leads to intimacy. And I'm not talking about yelling at each other, screaming conflict, but if, you and I are in a relationship and we have competing needs, you want something and what I want is different. When we learn how to talk about that and figure out how we can manage our competing needs, we get to have intimacy, which is really important. But I see a real fear of conflict, especially with people that have narcissistic people in their lives, especially when they were young.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I do see a lot where narcissistic parents will equate compliance with being a good kid, good person, good whoever. And so if you deviate from the course that the narcissist has prescribed, now you are disrupting everything. Now you're being difficult. You're being ungrateful. You're being a problem. And it's easy to internalize that and to feel like your sense of value is contingent on being good enough, which usually means being compliant enough, keeping someone else happy. And unfortunately, we can't control someone else's feelings, but that doesn't stop us from trying really, really, really hard sometimes.
Right. And I think it becomes really challenging that when we do have our own indistinct needs and we get pushback, then that reinforces that narrative of I'm being too picky, I'm being too sensitive, I'm being, for me, it's like I'm going to be annoying with my question asking. People are going to get annoyed with me because I'm trying to figure this stuff out. And that's a really big area that I think needs healing, because one of the ways that we really become empowered is to start learning, what do I need? What do I think? What do I feel? And again, if you and I are in a relationship and we're trying to negotiate, where do we go? What do we want to eat? It's often like, I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And you say something, I'm like, okay, even though that's not what my preference is, and really trusting that I can have my wants, my needs, my preferences, and you can have different ones, and we can work through it if it's a healthy relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's so important to note two things that really stood out to me when you were talking just then. One is this abject fear of being selfish or being perceived as selfish that can be utterly crippling for an adult child of a narcissist. And two is the sort of back end problem of being a people pleaser is that sooner or later, you're going to start noticing your needs that have gone unfulfilled. And sooner or later, that is going to cause resentment. Resentment is a relationship killer. People pleasing absolutely contributes to relationships ending that maybe don't have to end if you can be assertive, if you can learn to speak for your needs and to allow yourself to have needs, to recognize it's not selfish to need things.
Yeah, I often will hear clients say, I'm the one that people come to and I give and I'm so patient. And then when I need something, people aren't there for me. And it's true. I think that we often find how we can connect is by being available for other people, because we're not this is my projection, overwhelming them with our needs because we're being of service. So we get this great sense of connection, but we don't have the ability to look at the reciprocity in the relationship. And then when we do have high needs, we find that people are really not available and not capable of showing up for us, or they project their stuff on us. And it can be really unsettling because I think many of us that have wounding just are longing for that sense of connection because it feels good. But then when push comes to shove, there's really not a lot of reciprocity.
Yeah. I think too, for a lot of HSPs, not all, but a lot of them, especially if you grew up in a toxic home, there can be this sort of unspoken sense that you are starting off several steps back because you are already a pain in the butt with all of your needs and you're already too much and you're already too sensitive. So there's almost this sense of like, I have to make up for how difficult I am to be around. So then they will go like way above and beyond to the point of burnout and still feel like they're not good enough. And then be like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, I'm just trying to be a good person. It doesn't seem to be working. I don't know what else to do. I can't give anymore, but am I now being bad because I don't want to give anymore? Does that make me a selfish person? I need to give some more. And it really can create a horrible cycle of burnout.
That whole doubting one's sense of reality and not being sure, is this me? Is this you? And really having to tease that out and then reframing and learning, how do I identify where the deficits are and what's my part in it? And yeah, I mean, I see relationship issues as being one of the primary things that people struggle with when they come to work with me. Friendships, even friendships can be challenging. And how do I show up and how do I find meaningful friendships? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think those things are really, really important. It's funny again, like I'm on my kayaking thing, but I went to meet 2 people this morning and normally I just meet one, but I had, I don't want to get there late. I don't want to have them wait for me. What if it takes too long for me to unstrap my stuff? Just this whole not wanting to impose. And because these 2 people have been kayaking together, like I don't want to be the third wheel. It just, again, was just fascinating to see how many stories came up in my head about wanting to fit in and not have them wait for me and not cause problems and wanting to be a joy to be around. And it's like, and ironically, the other person got stuck in traffic and was 20 minutes late and we just waited. It wasn't a big deal. Mm-hmm. So at 57 years old, being a therapist and doing this work all the time, this stuff still comes up. And I go like, oh, isn't that interesting? Like I'm still feeling concerned that I don't want someone waiting or getting annoyed with me.
Yeah. I feel like HSPs and adult children of narcissists, like one of the areas that they intersect is that urgent need not to inconvenience anyone else, not to be difficult in any way, not to be a burden. And I have so many people who sit on the couch and tell me they can't ask for help because they don't want to put anything on someone else. They don't want to make someone else's life harder. It's like, sometimes you have to think about what happens if you completely collapse and all of the stuff you've been holding on your shoulders falls down. Do you think that's not going to inconvenience someone? Be right. Inconvenient. It's okay. You're allowed to.
That asking for help, boy, talk about a real direct wound from childhood emotional neglect. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I struggle with that. I have more kayak stories, but I'm afraid of my gremlins are going like, nobody wants to hear about your kayak stories. But with this stuff, with having to make these decisions. And yesterday my husband went with me because I've been going and getting research. And then all I can do is take pictures and come home because I can't make a decision. And he's like, let's just get this. Let's get that. Like, are you sure? I'm concerned about, should we get it somewhere else? Is it too expensive? And he's like, let's just get it. Having that co-regulation and having it be okay that I need support. And it's just so fascinating for me to see how challenging it can be sometimes to, need that co-regulation and need somebody to step in and the support and needing the help and going like, this is how it's supposed to be. This is a healthy thing. And it still can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, my OBGYN gave me the heck of a scolding because we were moving into a new house at the time. And for some reason, at 9 months pregnant, I decided it would be a good idea to climb up and down a ladder, moving books from one bookshelf to another for like an hour. I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't ask for help because I didn't want to. And then the next day I could hardly move. And my doctor gave me the look and was like, well, what did you think was going to happen? You're not supposed to do that. Ask for help. And I had to really sit back and say, like, what is going on that I couldn't ask for help with something I knew was not going to go well, that this was not a great idea. And I just couldn't bring myself to ask for help.
Right. Just knowing that it's really okay, and that sense of independence that we have, and not, yeah, I hear you. I totally hear you. When we recorded episode 85, you had mentioned codependence, and I always have a reaction when I hear that, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what that means to you.
So I see codependency in relationships with narcissistic people where the HSP, or the giver in the relationship, feels like their role in life is to fulfill the other person's needs. And so they wind up with people who have a lot of needs, who are very good at putting those needs out there to be met by someone else, and who may not really appreciate all of the effort that goes into trying to meet those needs. There can be that self-sacrificing piece that we talked about, of feeling like you can't ask and you need to make up for your existence, that just dovetails with the narcissist who feels like they are entitled to absolutely everything they want. And God help anyone who denies them that. And so I think it's a very easy trap to fall into, where you're meeting your sense of like, I need to show that I have value by providing something, by meeting these needs, and someone who was quite comfortable to soak up all of the giving that you can possibly put out.
Yeah. Do you think that we can get a hit of oxytocin when we do that also?
I think that's very possible, because we live so much of our lives wanting to feel good and helpful and useful and wanted. And if what we can do makes someone like us, then yeah, there is a draw to that. There's some gain from that, even though it hurts us at the same time.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard, and feel free to step in, Amy, oxytocin is the hit of what makes us feel really good. When we pet our animals, we get a hit of oxytocin. When we hold a baby, we get a hit of oxytocin. When we have meaningful connection, we get a hit of oxytocin. And I think for HSPs, because we value connection so much, it feels really good when we can show up and be of service. And I know for me, like, I love when it feels like things are in flow and I can be of service to people and it's not draining me. But I'm not always aware of when that tips to the point where, like, oh, this isn't feeling good anymore. Or my expectation is I'm going to give and give and give to you. And then when I need, you're going to be able to reciprocate, and then you can't. And I'm like, oh, this is not what I was expecting. And then I feel angry and resentful. So exactly what you were talking about, how that resentment, I think we have many of us, some of us. I always have to qualify.
All the qualifiers.
This is the world according to Patricia, that it's not uncommon for us to have unspoken expectations in relationships without even realizing it. And then when the other person doesn't follow their part of the agreement that they have no idea that they're a part of, we may not even know that we have this expectation. Then things go haywire and we're like, what the heck just happened? Here I've been doing and giving, and like, you're supposed to be responding and you're not.
Yes, absolutely. And once again, because this is how my HSP brain works, I have like multiple trains of thought going at once. One of them is that that's part of the love bombing process, which we did touch on in the previous episode, where a narcissist will come on charming and effusive and full of praise. And one of the things they often praise in an HSP is, you're such a good listener. You're so compassionate. You're so caring. You're such a nurturer. And of course, we feel like, oh man, like, I'm being appreciated for who I am and what I do. This is awesome. Like, this person really appreciates what I'm giving. And ultimately, the love bombing does not last forever. They lay it on thick until they've got you so invested in the relationship that you're like, well, of course, like, I'm going to keep giving because this person really just values it so much. And then the praise and the reciprocity fades. It drains off little by little by little. And so you continue to extend, hoping to regain it, thinking like, oh, well, maybe I just kind of got slacking on my caring and my giving. So I'll just try a little harder. And maybe they'll have the appreciation again. Maybe I just need to remind them that I like that appreciation, and then they'll show it again. And the reality is, you are now starting to see the more self-focused side of the narcissist that is no longer invested in love bombing, because now they're just kind of soaking up what you're willing to give.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I'm reflecting back to, I really appreciated your definition of codependency. I think my reaction is, I think that almost all behavior that we have is to survive. And so when I hear labels, oh, I'm being codependent, you're being codependent, it's like, well, you're doing what you needed to do to survive. And so I just wanted to circle back to that. Amy, I'm looking at time and we need to wrap up. So I did want to ask you about do you want to go no contact if you have a family member who's a narcissist? Why don't we do that? And then I'll ask if there's anything else that you want to cover that we haven't covered.
Okay. I actually wrote a blog article about this once because it comes up so often that people will come into my office and they'll want to know, should I cut off my mom? Should I break up with my boyfriend? And my answer is, I'm sorry to infuriate you, but I cannot give you that answer. That is so personal. I cannot make that decision for you. What I can help you do is look at what's happening in the relationship, look at your history with this person, look at their investment in making the relationship work and see, is there any way that we can make it healthier for you? That could include setting some boundaries if you've never done that before. That could include reinforcing or revisiting boundaries if they've gotten kind of lax or if they've been stomped on. It could include saying things like, you know what, maybe low contact is a better option, where instead of talking to my dad 4 times a day and feeling so frustrated with all the time that I'm wasting because I can't get anything else done in my life, that I say, Dad, I can talk to you at 6 o'clock after I get home from work, and I'm happy to give you an hour of my time then, because I can give you an hour of focus at 6 o'clock. Or it might be that you visit family for holidays and birthdays, and that you don't have a whole lot of contact with them outside of that, because that's what feels sustainable and doesn't sap you to the point where you're in bed for 2 days after a visit.
Yeah. What does healing look like if you have a family member? Because, what is that? How hard or easy is that? I mean, I know that's kind of a blanket question, but.
I probably annoy a lot of my clients with this because the answer is so often, it depends. It's definitely harder if you are living with the person who is narcissistic or emotionally immature, because the trauma tends to be ongoing at that point. You can't really get away from it that easily because it's every day. I'd say many people find it easier to start their healing when they have created some amount of distance from their person, whether that's moving out, not taking as many phone calls, not checking in as often, or not responding to every text that they get. I'm not saying you all have to immediately move out of the house that you live in with your narcissist if that's the case, but it can make it a lot easier. If that's not an option, then something like practicing the gray rock technique, where you simply give less emotional response to something that they do or say, can be helpful. Choosing what to respond to. So if they make a dig, you don't have to answer it. You don't have to try to defend yourself. You can just imagine that you didn't hear it. You can just give them a blank look. You can just walk away. There are many different ways to begin healing, which is the first step is really to stop receiving wounds as best you can. So to start putting up some protections.
Yeah. And if you're parenting with a narcissist and you're no longer in a relationship with them, have mercy. Have mercy, because that is just...
Yeah, that's a hard one.
That's a whole year's worth of a podcast.
I think you are right about that. That's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. What have we not covered that's feeling important to you that we should have covered?
I think what I come back to over and over and over is the importance of dismantling the idea that you're selfish to express your needs, and also to be able to hold space that more than one thing can be true at a time. It can be true that you love your mom, that you would die for her, and that she has hurt you so badly that you can't be in the room with her. So you can both love someone and need to put space between the two of you to protect yourself.
I think that's a really key factor in any kind of emotional growth and healing, that we tend to see things in terms of binary, right, wrong, good, bad, hate, love. And again, Dr. Gibson talks about this, that when we can hold more than one thing at a time, that I can be angry and I can be grateful, or I can be disappointed and I can be excited, that we can hold more than one feeling. And I think that when we deal with narcissists, emotionally immature people, they don't have that ability. It's, you either you love me or you hate me. And so there's no ability to see that it can be both. And that's really where most of the world exists, is somewhere in that middle place where we have both going on. And that's really what emotional maturity is, being able to hold both of those things, to have an appreciation and whatever other, contradicting feeling are coming up. So I love that point. I think that's really important.
Yeah, we actually just talked about this recently in the group that I run. The idea that For narcissists, there is no such thing as emotional object permanence. An object permanence is a psychological concept where if we don't actually physically see something, we know that it still exists. It didn't disappear into the void because we can't see it. And that's something we learn at a particular point in our childhood development. What happens for a lot of narcissistic people is they don't develop that in terms of their relationships. So if they are happy with you, if you are doing something they like, and you're, in line and being a good little trooper and all, then you're a good person and they love you. The minute you step out of line, it's like you stop being their loved one and now you are just an obstacle. And that's when the rage and the hurtful words and the cruel behavior can come out because you stop being a person to them. Now you're just a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Because really, if you're the person that's in a relationship with somebody, from their perspective, your job is just to meet their needs and to make them feel good. It's really not about what they have to offer you. It's about how you can be there to serve their needs, which that's painful. That's painful.
Yeah.
Especially when there's that threat in the relationship and then they come back and they lay it on heavy and then it's crazy making and it pulls you back in until you get the conflict and then, running through those cycles over and over because, well, he said he loved me or she said she loved me and we had this great thing and they said they were sorry and they care and maybe it's just me and maybe I am too. I think those things are the things that hook us back in, especially with our high levels of empathy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else before we go?
I mean, I could talk about this for a week.
I'm loving these conversations. It's just, I love the depth of kind of where we've gone with these topics.
I've really enjoyed it as well. And I guess the only thing I really want to say, and I said this in the last one too, is that please have hope. You can heal. You can feel better. This does not have to be a life sentence. I know it feels really hard when you're in the thick of it, and being in the weeds is a miserable place to be. And this is some of the hardest work you'll ever do, is healing from this kind of abuse. And it's some of the most worthwhile work that you'll ever do. So I really hope you can invest in yourselves for this healing.
I would imagine too that being able to break the shame when you work with somebody who's helping you heal the relationship breaks the shame. And then especially with the group work that you do, because my guess is that people go, if only I were, this wouldn't have happened. And then to hear other people that are reflecting that and to have so much love and compassion and understanding for other people and go they're a pretty cool person. I think that people think, well, because I'm defective, because I'm so whatever it is. And then they see other people that look like they've got their stuff together, that are caring and compassionate, articulate and bright. It's well, they fell for it. And there's nothing wrong with them that I see. So maybe there's nothing wrong with me. I think that's the power of talking about what goes on and then seeing other people that are having some of the same struggles, because it can be so validating and normalizing. And then we realize oh, maybe it's not about me. This was just a terrible situation.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny, that phrase, it's not about you, can be both very hurtful when someone is using it to imply that you're being too much. It can also be incredibly freeing to realize it's not about me. That's their stuff. I don't have to hold that. I'm going to give it back to them.
Exactly. Exactly. Where can people find you? Yeah. Where can people find you? And everything will be in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So you can find me at my website, www.amymarlow-macoy.com. Please click the link because it takes forever to spell out. And you can also find me on Facebook. My Facebook handle is Amy Marlow-Macoy, LPC. Same thing on Instagram.
And it's McCoy, MACOY.
Yes, because my husband's family just had to be different.
This has been great. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me back, Patricia. I had a great time.
Me too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey again. So I'm curious to know, what'd you think? I love that meditation that she did and some of the exercises that she talked about. After our first recording, she's sending me a copy of her book, but I haven't received it yet. Who knows with the U.S. Post Office? Maybe it's on its way. I'm really excited to take a look at her book. And if you're interested, you might want to take a peek at it. She knows her stuff. And I love this conversation that we had. I guess I'm curious to know, where are you at with your relationships? And do you need some support? And is Amy someone that can support you? If it's narcissistic abuse, she's really your person. That's not really my area of expertise. If it's something minor, then I can help you out, but not necessarily with that. How are you doing in general? We're getting close to elections here in the United States. I think things are going to get a little chaotic. Trying to not get too political, at least on the air with y'all. If you struggle with codependency, if you struggle with not knowing what you think or feel, with people pleasing, some of the things that Amy talked about that maybe are not directly related to healing from a narcissistic relationship, I have a couple of slots open. With COVID, most therapists that I know are pretty full, but if you're interested in a free 20-minute consult, or you want to work with me, or you're interested in the online HSP course, you can get all the information you need at my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com. I hope that you are taking care of yourself. I hope that you're having some amount of pleasure and peace, because we really need that, a little time in nature, a little downtime. I know some of you are just taxed to the limit right now and are really feeling the pressure. My hope is that you have a little bit of relief, and if you just have to do the best that you do the best that you can, and know that we will get through this. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being a listener. I really appreciate you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.